All right, well, welcome in everyone. Jay Smith here, bringing you another edition of After Further Review, and we are joined by the one, the only, the legend, Bradley Kendall and Jack McLaughlin, joining us via Anchor. We're on a three-way call. They can hear us. We can hear them. We're ready to bring you some AFR. Bradley, I guess we're gonna have to dive right into it, man. After further review.
Oh, I didn't even know I was doing an intro line. It's been so long. Oh, after further review, let's crack open the egg bowl. How about
Hey,
that?
for doing it on the spot, that was pretty impressive. And to
Hey,
be
thank you,
honest,
thank you.
man, you hadn't lost your touch at all because I've gone back, I've listened to a lot of old episodes, and I know that there were tons of them where we would be sitting there about 60 seconds airtime, and you'd look at me and you'd be like, "Wonder what my line's going to be," and
Yeah,
you would
that
just
was
you'd spit one out, and it was always pretty on point.
in honor of Jim Nance. It was a tradition unlike any other. I waited at least 30 seconds before, and then I just go with what comes to mind.
Hey, it worked for you. Gotta
That's
gotta go
right.
with what works. And Jack, you're joining us. I'm not sure why you wanted to come on for this big reunion, but you're here, and we're really happy you're here.
Well, I'm glad you could invite me on, and hopefully I can get a word or two in between the two of you. I know that's usually pretty tough.
Hey, man, you did it for
I
4 years, so you can figure it out now.
Yeah, and you've been on probably more than anybody else in terms of guests because we've had several people come on over the years, but I want to say this is probably the sixth or seventh time you've
Yeah,
done the show. Maybe Jackson's probably in second, our NFL draft guy. But yeah, you're definitely probably top in terms of coming on the show.
yeah. I mean, and I guess living with you guys, we'd have these conversations on a regular basis. So I think that had a part to play in it too. Because even when I wasn't on the show, I knew exactly what you guys were going to be talking about. So it's always fun to get to be on here and I guess have my thoughts thrown out there for everybody else to hear. So I
And this is the
appreciate it.
natural transition from number one fan to third anchor.
Oh yeah, well, look, I mean, we're all sitting here. It's Friday night at 8:30. We have nothing better than to sit down and record an episode of AFR because we're all quarantined. And I guess we'll just go ahead and get into what we're going to talk about tonight, which is the Egg Bowl. Bradley, you prefaced that a little bit earlier,
Cracking open, baby.
and we're going to crack this open. Yeah, man, we've got Lane Kiffin now at Ole Miss. You got Mike Leach, Evans, throwback to Evan McDowell, his favorite football coach, who is moving from Washington State to Mississippi State. And guys, I guess to start off, just a yes or no, do you feel like if we didn't have the piss and miss, shall we call it, that any of this would have happened?
Well, first off, I'm curious what Evan's going to do when he figures out not only did we not tell him we were doing this, but we talked about his icon and legend of a coach, Mike Leach. So that's cracking open two birds with one stone right there.
I think he'll survive. He'll make it.
He'll be okay. He'll probably consider it a win by not coming on. Anyway,
To answer your question, Jay, I think that yes, the piss and miss definitely had a huge part to play in what unfolded in this offseason. And I think at this point, with Mike Leach coming to the SEC, it only strengthens that conference, especially with Lane Kiffin coming in. Also, I think it makes for a very interesting matchup coming into this year for the Egg Bowl.
yeah, I cannot think of a
Yeah,
better way to kick off a Thanksgiving night, it looks like, than watching some Ole Miss and Mississippi State, which I'll be honest, up until, I mean, last year, like we had some pretty entertaining games, but there wasn't a huge desire to rush to the TV to watch the Bulldogs and Rebels take on. So, I mean, this will be,
Since 2014, Bradley, when
yeah, since
Dak
since
Prescott was
that's
there,
Prescott
right.
was
Yeah.
there,
they were
they had a couple of good games there back in the mid
yeah, they
2010s.
were. Dak Prescott was leading Mississippi State. They were 10-1 going into the Egg Bowl, and Ole Miss actually beat them 31-17 and ruined their playoff hopes. So that's the last time there was big playoff implications for this game. But like Bradley said, it's been entertaining quite a few times. But in those years where Prescott was at Mississippi State, those games were especially entertaining, and they had a lot of playoff implications to them.
See, I feel like this is going to be, and yes, I agree with I think both of you that the piss and miss largely resulted in because if you go back to last season before this game, there were a lot of people. And this is a direct quote from the athletic director Keith Carter, who's now at Ole Miss, and he basically said, you know there was a large portion of our fan base that had been on the fence that were maybe willing to give Matt Luke another year and to see where we could take that thing. But when the events of that night happened, because he fired him 3 days after the game, it kind of put those people on the other side of the fence. And I think because Keith Carter, he said this too, and a couple former players have said that Matt Luke was the right guy for the job. He was beloved by the players in the locker room. And he actually picked up a position pretty quickly at Georgia, but it just snowballed. And because, it was Mississippi State's former coach was really more on the hot seat than Matt Luke. And that one game just completely, because, Joe Moorhead was really on the bubble. And that game didn't.
Yeah, and I think you started to realize as his tenure kind of went on at Mississippi State, Joe Moorhead was a glorified version of like Wade Phillips, where he was just destined to be a coordinator. That's just kind of what he does. I think he was able to get the offensive side of the ball rolling for a good bit of it because he was that, quarterback guru that they brought in from was he a defense coordinator or offense coordinator? I can't remember. Back at Penn State.
Joe
yeah,
Moorhead?
Was he defensive?
Joe Moorhead was, I want to say, you put me on.
I want to say
offensive coordinator.
Offensive coordinator. That's what I thought. Yeah, because he was at Penn State for a little while and had some pretty well developed quarterbacks. So you thought
like
maybe
Hackenberg ?
Oh, dude, why not? the Jets legend Christian Hackenberg. But I mean, you thought coming into it after the Dak Prescott era, he could reignite what was going on in Stark Vegas with Nick Fitzgerald, and he never seemed to grasp both sides of the ball. I think that was always Mississippi State's downfall, was they were never able to be a two-dimensional team. It was always just kind of focused on one side.
And
and can't confirm he was an offensive coordinator at Penn State. Yeah, can't confirm.
And I think with the piss and miss, it's one thing if your team is winning games and they're doing those celebrations and it doesn't look like you have full control over the team and the players. It's another thing when you're 4-7 and you're celebrating a touchdown and you still haven't even won the game. That's just a bad look to end the season, and the fact that they ended up losing that game. I think it's a really bad taste to end that season for that coach. And when all those fans and those boosters are seeing that and they're pushing back saying, what the heck is going on here? Why did this happen? The first person that's going to get pointed at is that head coach.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I feel like now that Kiffin is at the helm at Ole Miss, and now that Leach is at the helm at Mississippi State, there's going to be a lot more intrigue surrounding not only the rivalry, but both of these schools in terms of recruiting. Because look, Mike Leach pretty much put Washington State on the map. I mean, in terms of just the press conferences, everything he had to say on and off the field, and I think that one class he taught maybe a couple of
was it the warfare?
It was like a warfare class with football tied into it. So Mike Leach
is a character.
Is a character, and everybody knows the history of Lane Kiffin. And if you're on Twitter, you've probably seen a couple of the jabs that Lane Kiffin tends to throw. I don't think either of these guys are like Steve Spurrier level of trolling. Kiffin's probably pretty close, but you've got to imagine that this is going to – the media buzz surrounding this game in the fall, it's going to be a lot bigger than we've seen since these teams were, contending for a playoff.
Oh, without a doubt. And you look at the opportunity now in the SEC. I mean, some of the windows are closing. I mean, I know that you've got, the normal powerhouses, Georgia, Alabama, Florida's kind of on the rise, but one of these schools, you got to feel like with one of these hires, we'll break through and have, sort of just an off the radar season, like back when Prescott took Mississippi State to number one. And if I had to put my money on it, I'd say just because Mike Leach has a repeated history of coming in and just taking over and putting a school on the map, you got to think from day one, if he can take Gardner Minshew and put him in the NFL, he can take whoever they've got at the helm for at quarterback for Mississippi State and turn him into a Heisman contender, because that's just what he does.
Well, and my question really to both of you is, do you feel like Leach is going to do something something similar to what we saw Dan Mullen do at Mississippi State, which is build the program up, get them some national relevance, and then take a better job within the conference? Because now you see what Dan Mullen's doing. Before we continue with that,
I just want to make a quick note that you did actually use the correct way of saying relevance, which I'm proud of you for.
Here we go.
Oh, I appreciate that. But no, because I feel like I feel like right now Mississippi State and Ole Miss, I mean, look, they're bottom of the West, and yes, you could say that the West is the deeper division with LSU, Alabama, and Auburn. A&M has not panned out. Arkansas may never win a conference game again. So, what do you like? Where? My question, really, to both of you is: where do Mississippi State and Ole Miss fall in the West? Where's the pecking order?
I mean, right now, Jackie, sorry to interrupt you. I would say right now, I think Mississippi State, with just the repeated history they've had recently of playing, first off, the right way, but actually remaining on the national scene relevant, I'd say Mississippi State, just with what they've developed, even with what Joe Moorhead was kind of tearing down, I think they have at least been given a brighter future. Ole Miss is obviously coming off of, some scandals and, seeing Matt Luke at least develop them a little bit. But I think the 6-7 season you saw last year is not a good representation of where the program's at. I mean, if you look at their history the last 10 years, I mean, Mullen had them right around 8-5 and 9-4. That's, I think, what they're going to be shooting for with Mike Leach. Might get a couple upsets here and there. If they get the 10 wins, that'd be ideal. But I'd say if I had to put my money on in 3 years, who's at 10 wins first, probably Mississippi State.
So based off of what I've seen, Bradley, I think that both Mississippi State and Ole Miss it seemed like they were peaking right around the same times in the SEC a few years back with like 2014, 2015. That was the Dak Prescott area and the Swag Kelly era, if I remember correctly, or they were right around the same time. So I think both of them had their waves where they had really good teams that were competing against the Alabamas and the Auburns and the LSUs of their division. But based off of what I'm seeing, I think both coaches are fantastic coaches. They're going to come in and really help their teams. But I think if you're looking at direct impact right away, I think Mississippi State's going to have a better season coming up just based off of who they have returning. Ole Miss doesn't have as many returning players, especially on the offensive side, as compared to Mississippi State. Mississippi State has their running back returning, their top wide receiver, and also they have KJ Costello coming in at QB, who was a Stanford transfer, and he was fantastic at Stanford when he wasn't injured.
Well, I don't want to interrupt, but no matter who Ole Miss goes with at quarterback, whether Kiffin decides it's going to be Matt Corral, which is more your pocket passer, or John Rice Plumlee, who's more of your dynamic playmaker, both those guys are coming back. They're going to get better. They're going to get more reps. It's going to be a new system they're going to have to learn under Kiffin. But I just want to throw this little nugget at both of you, because if you look at the schedules for both of these teams, it gets particularly brutal in October. Yeah, because you've got, and both of these schools actually have this gauntlet slate. Mississippi State deals with it October 17th through the 31st. They go at Alabama, at LSU, and then they host Auburn. You flip it over to the Rebels side. They have it a little bit earlier in the season, September 19th through October 3rd. They host Auburn, travel to LSU, and then they take on Alabama at home. I know that the likelihood of them winning one, even two of those three games is slim to none. But Ole Miss did put up 400 yards rushing against LSU's vaunted defense last season. They were able to move the ball well against them. So I feel like because that stretch of three games is earlier in the season for the Rebels, they stand a bit of a better chance. Because do you really think mid-season Alabama at Bryant-Denny is going to give the Bulldogs any shot?
I have a hard time seeing Mississippi State or Ole Miss being able to beat that slate, because they're all playing Auburn, LSU, and Bama all within the same 3 weeks. And
well, the only other common opponent is Texas A&M. Texas A&M and
I think
Arkansas.
they can both give A&M a game. I'm not too sold on A&M at this point, based off of what I've seen from them in the past. But those big three, I think that those three are in a tier of their own, and then the next tier after that is a drop off. So I don't see I don't see Mississippi State or Ole Miss being able to beat those teams at this point. I think that's going to be 3 losses in both of those teams' columns, especially with the fact that they're all back to back for them.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I think if you look at a season, just outlook in general, preseason, you obviously want to start at the very top and who they kind of begin the season with. And if I'm a coach looking at the beginning of the year and I'm looking to develop my team by week 5 or 6 to be prepared for the SEC schedule, I'm not exactly excited about hosting Baylor and then immediately having to host Auburn and then go to LSU within the end of September. So I mean, if I'm both coaches, Mississippi State, I feel like
That's a
okay,
neutral site game, by the way.
gosh,
Ole
I
Miss
mean, even
Baylor is
still, like
neutral.
Baylor coming off a historic season last year. If I'm Ole Miss and Mississippi State, I'm looking at potentially 4-0 for maybe even 5-0 for Mississippi State going into the Alabama game if all things fall into place. And then at best for Ole
Right.
Miss, I'm looking at maybe a 1-3, 1-4 start most likely. So I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'd rather
Hmm.
be able to coach a team that's 4-1 with momentum than 1-4 trying to work their way back.
I agree with Bradley on that one.
I don't disagree. I just feel like, when you get later in that season, when you get to your UConn, A&M, Arkansas, Georgia Southern stretch for Ole Miss, they're going to kind of coast into the end of the season. You're right. You're absolutely right. That stretch at the beginning is tough, and I don't expect them to beat Auburn at home. I don't expect them to beat LSU on the road. I don't think they're going to beat Alabama. I don't think they're going to beat Florida. I think two games that Ole Miss needs to circle this season are Baylor and Texas A&M
Yeah.
on the road. And I think if you're Mississippi State, two games you need to circle this season are A&M at home and Kentucky on the road, because that's an important game. You can't overlook
And it's
Yeah.
also
the
going without
Wildcats on
saying,
the
I
road.
mean, obviously the game you want to circle on any schedule is the last game of the year, but you could be looking at that potentially being,
Sure, sure.
a bowl game opportunity for one of these schools, maybe an 8-win season if you're Mississippi State at best. So, I mean, I think if you get towards the end of the year, unless one of these schools has just a magical run and they're in the contention for the SEC championship game, that's going to be what really stands out when you look back at the season and go, huh, like we're 8-5, we beat Ole Miss. That's a pretty good year.
Yeah,
What do
no,
you
I
think,
agree.
Jack?
I think that this year's game is going to have bowl game implications to it. I think Ole Miss is definitely. I don't like the fact that they're going to start off. I think they're going to start off 1-4, and I kind of agreed with Bradley on that one. I think that slow start is going to be tough to kind of crawl back from. I think I have them going 5-7 for the year because they have a tough slate of
Mm-hmm.
games that they have to play Florida and A&M also. A&M is at home is at A&M, and Florida is not an easy game to
Yeah,
have to play against or as your crossover SEC team.
no,
So I think this year's Ole
yeah,
Miss schedule, just looking at it, it's brutal to say the least. And Mississippi State, they
yeah.
have a little bit easier schedule coming into this year, and they only have to deal with those big three, and they're probably just going to take the losses on them. But
I mean, they've got A&M at home and they've got Auburn at home, but then they have to go at Alabama, at LSU, at Kentucky. Ole Miss, you've got Auburn at home, Alabama at home, Florida at home, and then you go on the road to LSU and A&M. I would rather play LSU. I'm sorry, I'd rather play A&M on the road. I'd rather play Auburn and Alabama at home. I think Ole Miss has the potential to win one of those three games out of the Auburn, Alabama, and Florida. I'm not saying that there's a high likelihood of it happening, but and again, I was there last season with the LSU game, and they showed signs and sparks. And again, with college football, you never really can predict anything. I mean, obviously, we can sit here and crunch numbers all we want, but at the end of the day, there's always going to be one game on your schedule. I mean, you look at what Clemson's had in the last 4 to 5 seasons with Syracuse and NC State and Pitt. I mean, there's just always that one game that you can't really explain. UNC this past season was
and
was Clemson's
yeah, and
game,
Jay,
so there's
one thing that
a
I agree with you
possibility.
on. Lane Kiffin has done a fantastic job as an offensive coordinator, especially with mobile QBs. If they end up going with John Plumlee, who's the mobile QB that they were kind of tossing around last season, it could end up being a Jalen
Yeah,
Hurts type of situation like what they did at Alabama, where you have the possibility of the QB running, the possibility of a great running back in Jerry Ely running, or him passing it. So you have that threat there that can
well, and
cause mayhem
he's
for teams like Alabama and LSU that have always struggled with the mobile QBs.
Yeah, and Bradley, I mean, Plumlee is definitely not a Jalen Hurts kind of build. I mean, he's a smaller guy. I mean, he can't take the beating that someone like Jalen Hurts took. But
That was
Bradley,
Jack, by
I
the way.
just curious.
Your turn's over, Jack.
Right,
Okay, sorry.
and thanks for your point.
I'm getting
But
tired.
I've turned it over to Bradley now because I'm just curious, like, which coach do you feel like is going to have the best system to fit the SEC? Like we've seen what Kiffin's done kind of on the offensive side of the ball, and I would make the argument, which I think is a valid argument, that the SEC is more offensive driven than it used to be. This is not 10 years ago SEC football. Which coach do you feel like, Bradley, has the best, you know,
Opportunity?
I guess, skills to build the best opportunity? I mean, obviously recruiting will be big for both of them, but who would you pick in that?
I mean, experience-wise, I think
Heads up.
Kiffin's got the, in-game experience coaching in the conference for a little while, so he at least knows what he's getting into and has probably watched, over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, the transition the SEC's made. But I think that transition he's seen has fit way more into Mike Leach's hands than anything else because of what we saw last year at LSU. I mean, LSU completely took the SEC by storm by throwing the ball, and Joe Burrow was able to pick apart all these SEC great defenses. So, I mean, you look at KJ Costello coming in as probably the best quarterback in the ACC right now. It's arguable, but he's certainly up there. And you got a guy like Mike Leach that knows how to coach even a one-star recruit in Minshew in year one. I mean, I think that's a perfect storm combination right there. That you're looking at 8, 9 wins, maybe even 10 wins if things all fall into place. I know it's not likely, but I feel way better if I'm Mike Leach with what we saw last year and how teams are still probably trying to figure out how to deal with a air raid offense like that they just haven't seen in the SEC. So I'd say it falls right into Leach's breadbasket.
I'd agree. I think it's probably more set up for Leach than it has been in years past. If this was 10 years ago, it might be a little bit of a different story. I think, with this, we're going back to the schedule, just touch on one point. Like if Mississippi State comes out of the gate and, let's say they beat NC State on the road and all of a sudden they're 4-0 going to that A&M game. Maybe they pick up that one. They're 5-0 or they're 4-1. That can kind of build momentum, and maybe they take down an Auburn, or maybe they, because look, I spent a couple of weeks ago, I did a pretty deep dive into LSU, what their outlook is going to be for next season, and they're not invincible. They're not the LSU that they were last season. So it's potentially possible for one of these teams to pick off LSU, who, is probably going to be sleeping on a game like this. And they're going to be looking at a bigger game on their schedule, like Texas, or on the road at Florida, hosting Alabama, traveling to Auburn and A&M. I mean, LSU has a tough go.
I agree. And it always goes back to, I think this division in the SEC West, is just brutal to say the least. There's a lot of really good teams, a lot of really talented players in here. And like you said, Jay, it's college football. You never know what's going to happen. And LSU on any given day could just decide they could have a bad day, and Mississippi State can show up and play their best game, and next thing you know, they're beating a top 10 team and they're starting to jump into the top 25 and looking really pretty going into the end of the season.
Yeah, and I mean, you gotta just hope that a team like A&M just doesn't meet expectations like they did last year. A team like Auburn, who's still going to be on the rise after what Bo Nix did last year, and of course Alabama and LSU aren't going anywhere. So I mean, you're looking at two teams now that are fighting for maybe the 4th spot if they get lucky, the 3rd spot. But I mean, I think you're still much rather be in the ACC East. Pretty much for the last 10 years, it looks like that's been the case. If you have any chance of taking down the top dogs and finishing near the top, it's just so difficult with the schedules they've got laid out to overcome any of these big boys. At best, you're looking at a bowl eligibility 4th place team in the West.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I really feel like right now, Auburn has probably the most to prove coming into this season, because there was a 9-4 Auburn team that last year lost all the games, all those big games that mattered. I mean, they dropped the Florida game.
It was the
road.
best
They
9-4 team to ever exist in college football.
Yeah, Georgia. I mean, yeah, they lost to, their three losses the regular season were to top 10 teams, and then obviously they lost to Minnesota in the I think it was the Outback Bowl, 31-24. But Auburn coming into 2020 has a lot to prove, and so does Alabama after being left out of the playoff. But you look at Auburn's schedule, and the Georgia game on the road is one you're going to circle. But honestly, guys, I'm not seeing any other game on their schedule that is a huge worry. I mean, because LSU they have at home, they have Texas A&M at home, they have Kentucky at home. Alabama's on the road at the end of the season, but I really feel like the Auburn Tigers are going to get at least 10, 11 wins this coming season, and they're going to be fighting. Instead of being third in the West, they're going to be fighting for that 1 or 2 spot. It's probably going to be between Alabama
Yeah, and you've got
and
a lot of
Auburn
your
this
key
fall.
games that you should win, at least at home. I mean, UNC is going to be a neutral site. You got to think they can win that, even with Sam Howell's development. If Bo Nix really
Sure,
gets
yeah.
hot after the Kentucky game and you go into Georgia and you're feeling good, I mean, you win that. That's already one game checked off the list. And then you roll into potentially the LSU game at 10-1. I mean, you got to feel pretty good if you can split the last 2 games and finish 10-2. I think that's best case scenario. But we also saw that Nix could be a little lackluster at times. He started the season off well, but I think the lights were a little bright at sometimes for a freshman that's always wanted to play at Auburn. They could easily trip up against UNC first couple weeks and then be fighting for that third spot again at 9-4, like Jack said, best 9-4 team in the country. So you like your chances if you're Auburn, but the schedule's kind of up and down. I mean, there's definitely not any game that's a guarantee in the SEC anymore, maybe outside of Arkansas, but it'll be tough.
Well, I think, Jack, I think we all kind of agree that the West is going to be fairly wide open. I don't think any of us expect Mississippi State or Ole Miss to really be in contention for that top spot this fall, but it's going to be there's going to be less disparity than we saw last season, where you had LSU at 8-0 in the conference, and then Alabama at 6-2, Auburn at 5-3, A&M was 4-4. So,
Yeah,
I
and the
think it's
thing
going to
is
be
you got to
a good
look at
deal
each team
closer.
individually in the West, that each team is improving. I mean, outside of Arkansas, who really can't go anywhere else but up, Ole Miss is
That's
looking to improve.
debatable.
Well, we'll see. 2-10,
Yeah.
you can always lose 2 more games. A&M, you got to think with Jimbo Fisher again. Maybe Kellen Mond finally breaks through. Auburn's going to get better. Bama has to get better after a historic 2-loss season. And then LSU, you got to think maybe falls down a couple games, but they're still towards the top. So top to bottom, I mean, the conference itself or the division itself is really improving. And then on the flip side of the East, I mean, Tennessee's on the rise. We don't know what South Carolina will be. Georgia's going to be better. Florida will be better.
Well, and I think there's more
Right.
questions than answers on the East side of the SEC. There's more answers than questions right now on the West side, because you're right. Like South Carolina dipped really, really low with that 4-8 season this past year. You saw a Missouri team that kind of muddled their way to a 6-6 season, but you got Tennessee and Kentucky at 8-5. Vandy is anchoring the bottom of the division like they always are. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the
Yeah, and I
SEC
think a
shakes
lot of
up this
that, like
fall.
you said, Jay, with the SEC East being a lot of questions, no answers, and vice versa for the West, I think that goes into the coaches. When you look at the coaching and how much experience the West has at this point between Nick Saban, Ed O, the
Mike
addition
Leach.
of Mike Leach and Lane Kiffin, and then you have Gus Malzahn. I mean that
Right.
that whole collection of coaches is just a really solid group. And then when you look at the East, it's a lot of newcomers that are trying to prove themselves right now with Kirby Smart, the Tennessee coach, Dan
Pruitt.
Mullen, Pruitt. So
Dan
they're
Mullen
all
at
just starting
Florida.
out and building their resumes now, which is exciting.
Muschamp has been there for a while. Muschamp's been at South Carolina for a while, but you're right. I think by and large, I think that's a good point. One other thing I want to bring up to y'all, because I'm curious. Obviously, Saban's time at Alabama it's not going to last forever. I don't see him being a senile Joe Paterno style coach who's just walking up and down the side. Like Saban's going to do it as long as he can win. Obviously, 2 losses last season was not up to his expectations. We'll see how this season goes for the Crimson Tide. My question to y'all is, if in the next few years, if things go well for Lane Kiffin and Mike, let's say things continue as is right now, and let's say Jimbo and A&M continue to struggle. Right, they're 8-5. Like that's for all the money they're paying
He is
Jimbo
on the hot
Fisher.
seat.
Things have not panned out like they were expecting them to. Right. So if A&M starts struggling, Arkansas stays at the bottom. Maybe LSU dips down because this season was a blip. You know, if they're not able to maintain consistency, and let's say Ole Miss and Mississippi State start creeping up in the standings, and Nick Saban leaves. Do you feel like there's a realistic chance someone like Lane Kiffin, who has prior coaching experience at Alabama, could get snagged for that job? Or do you think Kiffin has to do something like win an SEC championship, go to a playoff, even win a national championship to even remotely
I think
have
you're
a
going to have to
shot
see a lot of
at
growth like
Alabama's head
Matt
coaching
Rule did
job?
at Baylor. I know they're not exactly on even playing fields when it comes to where Baylor was at versus where Ole Miss was at, but similar stories. I mean, obviously coming after a scandal like both Baylor and Ole Miss had, they were already in rebuild mode. I think in order to replace, a guy like Nick Saban at Bama, you're going to have to see a lot of potential out of Kiffin. Yeah, he's a young guy. Yeah, he's been around the block a couple of, younger.
He's not young anymore,
Younger.
man.
He acts like
He's
he's
mid
younger.
Yeah.
40s, younger than Saban, but
It's tough to see.
he's been
Yeah, it's
coaching
tough to see a
since
guy in
we
Boca
were
Raton
born,
rocking a
90,
Hawaiian shirt and not think
97.
he's younger than he is. But I don't know. I mean, there's so many good coaches out there that are willing to step in the shadow of Nick Saban. Not to say Kiffin couldn't take it on as a challenge, but I think you're going to really have to see a drastic change in environment at Ole Miss. Like I said before with Matt Rule at Baylor, taking him to a Cotton Bowl. I think Kiffin's going to have to be competing in the top two at least in the SEC West, which right now is just a really tall order.
Yeah.
I think that for him to get considered for the Alabama head coaching job, I think there's two things. I think that first of all, he has to show that he can compete with the big boys, like Bradley said. I'm especially thinking of the game against Bama. If he can show that he can recruit, get that team developed to the point where he can compete with a team like Alabama that's coached by Nick Saban, that'll gain the respect of a lot of people. He's coaching against your former boss and giving him a good game is a huge deal. And I think the second thing for them that they're probably going to be looking for is the maturity. He needs to be able to develop a team and be a good representative for that school, not have any of the antics that usually follow him every school that he goes to. I haven't really read too much about him at FAU. I think he actually stayed pretty clean and did a really good job there of developing that program. So if he can do that at Ole Miss and kind of avoid all of the craziness that has followed him in the past and really set up a good program there, I think that Alabama definitely they should consider him. That's my opinion. I think they definitely should because he's been there. He knows how it runs. He knows how Nick Saban likes to operate things. So it's a great plug and play in if Nick Saban ends up leaving.
And I feel like I talked about this actually back when Ole Miss was having classes and everything wasn't online because of the coronavirus with Jason. And I feel like Kiffin, he's been in coaching. I mean, he's 44, so he's in his mid-40s. He's been in coaching since 97, started out at Fresno State. Interesting, he's never really been at he had that stint at USC, from 2001 to 2006. But other than that, he's never really been anywhere for more than 3 to 4 years. He was at FAU from 2017 to 2019, and then Alabama 2014 through 2016. But I feel like at this point, he's in his mid-40s. He's got this head coaching job at Ole Miss, a school that expectations are low. I mean, expectations are low. I think if you gave the fan base
They'd take
a
that and be
bowl
happy.
eligible season, they would
They'd give him
put
a
you on their
statue.
shoulders and parade you around Oxford. I mean, honestly, like the temperament right now around the program is people are really more worried about tailgating than going to the football games. But they're starved for just consistency, and there were so many games last season watching it as an Ole Miss fan for the first time, just being so close. It was almost like a Clemson under Tommy Bowden, being so close and, having everything, all the pieces are in place. Like you have decent talent. These aren't 5 stars walk around, but there's talent. And there's just not everything is there. So for me, I feel like Kiffin is at a point in his career where he really kind of wants to make a name for himself
Joey Freshwater.
other than the name he's already made, which is, right. So I think if things go well for him, I could see him staying at Ole Miss for 7, 8, 9, maybe even 10 years. And then later on down the line, possibly that Alabama position. Now, I don't know. I mean, Saban's getting pretty up there in age. I find it hard to believe that Saban will still be coaching 7 years, 8 years from now. But, I think timing is everything. And I think right now, Kiffin's best bet is probably just focus on the present, win the games that are in front of you. And if he has the desire to move up the ladder, he can definitely do that. Now, I feel very confident. Both Mississippi State and Ole Miss can turn into, top 25 head coaching jobs in the country. I mean, they're in a good conference. They're in the deepest division of the SEC. And unless Alabama, LSU, or Auburn just fall off the
look
map,
at,
it's going to be
like you were saying, Jack, earlier, like the reasonable expectations at Ole Miss, while they are low, I think you're at a point now where you're in an environment where you can upset big dog teams. You can upset a lot of really good teams because you're playing them week in and week out. And those are the ones that are going to stand out as opposed to finishing 8-5 and 9-4. If you can finish consistently, because Ole Miss has not had a winning season since 2015. It's been a little while. So if you can start really, producing and year in and year out, you're, improving a game or two each year, and you get up to about 9-10 wins. Like you said, Jay, I don't think 7 years from now Nick Saban's going to be there. And just thinking about the coaches that have had history around the program, he's probably one of the only few candidates they'd consider if he was able to build up a team like Ole Miss. So while he's in a really tough division, he's in a really good spot with a lot of opportunity. I think that's the big word for Lane Kiffin is there's a lot of opportunity. It might not work now, but give him 3-4 years. If you're seeing consistent growth, you're going to start to see eyes open up.
And I think Lane Kiffin has always done a really good job of seizing those opportunities wherever they're at and taking full advantage and being as successful as he can. FAU is the perfect example. I mean, he got his head coaching job. He took them from a 3-win team to a 10-win team, and they became a powerhouse, competing for their championship, their conference championship every year that he was there. So he does a really good job of seizing the opportunity and creating the change. He was able to do it very fast at FAU. I think it's going to take a little bit more time in the SEC with how much competition there is, but I think in the area that he's at and the recruits that he could pull in from that southern area, I think that he has a really good chance to start to pull in, steal some players from LSU, Alabama, A&M, and start to develop a team that he can rally behind and start giving really good games to some of these big teams. So I'm excited for him.
Yeah, and again, I think we all agree.
Yes.
Egg Bowl is going to be a must-watch game this fall. It's going to be a game that, regardless of where the teams stand, I think more than likely they're going to be fighting for bowl eligibility going into this game. Mississippi State may already have that edge. They might be a 6-5 looking for that 7th win. But I think, honestly, both of these programs would be content with a 500 level season starting off first year and building, because you remember, I mean, all sorts of programs with great coaches now. I mean, obviously the Clemson's Dabo Swinney, that kind of sticks out to us. But I mean, there's other examples out there where things didn't start out so great, but you give the coach time, the administration backs them, and there's resources there, and a fan base that's patient, and things
and it took
will
Dabo,
progress
3 or 4
as long
years
as there
to really
aren't any
start
major
developing
off-the-field
those
issues.
winning seasons for Clemson, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
so
right.
Oh, four, yeah.
So it takes
4 or 5.
it takes
It took him
time
5
to
tries
develop
to beat South Carolina.
to develop these teams like Clemson and Alabama. As long as Mississippi State and Ole Miss are willing to invest that time in these coaches, they will see the rewards of that patience, in my opinion.
Yeah, and you got to think they will too. I mean, you look at Mike Leach's coaching tenures, both places he's been, because it's amazing he's only been at 2 schools as a head coach.
That's uncommon nowadays.
Over the course of almost 20 years. Texas Tech was very patient. You saw what he made out of them. And then Washington State. It took him 4 years to get over 500, and then for the next 4 or 5 years after that, he was flirting with 10 wins every season. So I think if you're Mississippi State, you're getting a guy that's really experienced, that knows what it takes to win, and has a good system in place. They're going to be very patient with Mike Leach because they know he can get it there. And with Lane Kiffin, I think you're at a place at Ole Miss where unless you just pull out a Matt Luke era where you can't even get over 500, if you're flirting with 7-8 wins every year, they're going to be patient and let you continue to grow, especially knowing the division they're
in. And let's be honest, guys. Let's be honest here for a second, because as much as we are excited about both of these coaches now being at rival schools in the SEC, there's a hint, just a hint, of both of these being splash hires. Because look, the fact of the matter is, attendance for both of these schools was down significantly in recent years, especially for non-conference games. There were some games that Ole Miss played this past season where the attendance was rough. I mean, rough. And so I think both of these schools feel like they made the right hire. Obviously, they're going to publicly defend their decision, and the alumni so far. I mean, obviously the first family of Ole Miss, the Mannings, have been supportive of it. But at the same time, you've got to think there's a hint, just a little bit, of these being splash hires to create more interest in the program.
I'm just saying,
go, Bradley.
No, it's okay. You got it.
Bradley, go.
I was just gonna say, it's interesting. I'm
Somebody's
actually looking at tickets right now. $37. That's a bargain to see the Egg Bowl.
Yeah, that is a steal.
Bargain.
Yeah, I'm telling you, man. It was attendance the last few years for both of these schools has been. So, is there any validity to that? I mean, y'all agree?
Yeah.
So
my question to you guys is, what attracts fans to come and watch college football games? What's that in your opinion?
I mean, for me, obviously, I want to see, a competitive product. I mean, there were a lot of games last season, just watching as an Ole Miss fan for the first time, where we had several games that we should have won. The Auburn game was winnable. The Texas A&M game was winnable. The Memphis game was winnable. Obviously, the Egg Bowl game, where we just didn't execute. And so for me, one of the biggest gripes I had was just they just either looked disinterested or they just weren't executing. And that's only happened a couple of times at Clemson. That Florida State game way back in, I believe it was 2013, sticks out in my mind. Or no, it was 2015.
2013.
It was either 2013 or 2015. One of y'all. It was 2013. Yes, it was the year we beat Georgia in the season opener, where the players just, I mean, you could tell by halftime Clemson they had given up. They had absolutely given up in that game where we got thrashed. I think it was 52-14. So for me, the biggest thing I look for is just execution and the guys showing that they're all in and invested.
And again, I think a lot of it is the very beginning
Absolutely.
of the season is key, and that's why I'm really worried for Ole Miss. Although they've got all those big games, and some of which may be at home, it's kind of hard to get fans excited, even though there may be some signs of improvement when you're 1-4 to start the year. That alone just puts a real damper on the rest of the SEC schedule. Yeah. As opposed to being, we started 5-1, kind of like what A&M does every year. They start like 5-0, and then they lose every other game the rest of the year.
Yep.
If you can get,
and you give them no shot at winning any of those big games, you don't feel like there's a remote shot that they pull off.
I think Ole Miss and Mississippi State, the best chances they have of beating one of the big three is LSU. Honestly.
Yeah.
Yep, I agree, 100%.
Yeah,
100%. Auburn.
I don't know. I think
Auburn this season are not going to be tough.
I think Mississippi State at least could compete with Auburn only because of the system. Ed Orgeron.
When you lose someone like Joe Burrow, it's tough.
LSU is going to drop. They don't have near the pieces in place. You're not just losing your starting quarterback. You're losing your coordinators. I mean, this is LSU is rebuilding. They are rebuilding, and they might have an ace in the hole kind of Kelly Bryant to get them to 11 wins and a playoff berth. But I'm telling you right now, there is nobody that thinks that LSU is going to be one of the best 4 teams.
I don't think they will, but I think
they're going to have to see
saw what it takes to get there, and he saw what kind of people he had to hire to get to that point. So I don't think it's going to be a massive drop-off. I think they'll still be around 9-10 wins. All I'm saying is just, Yeah, I would just say that the system
They'll
itself, I think,
be
is something
9-3,
to be looked at because
84.
Auburn's a team. While they can put up points, a lot of the times you're looking at a team that's going to win a game in the 20s and 30s. And if Mississippi State's really scoring points like Mike Leach is used to, you look at that high-powered offense and you look at that as a chance to upset a team like Auburn.
Yeah.
But again, we don't even know what these teams will look like.
And Bradley, that was the point that I guess I was getting at earlier with my question.
Yep.
To attract the fans, I think the biggest thing you can do is get a high-powered offense in there that's scoring points on a regular basis. And that's what both of these coaches do best.
Yep.
They're both known for their offensive prowess. They can put up points. They can put up yards. Defense, questionable at times, but when you can put up 45 points in a game, then people will show up, whether they get 50 points, whether you lose 50 to 45, but they'll go just because it's entertaining and it's fun to watch when you're air raiding the offense and you're just racking up yards. So I think that's one of the most exciting things that I'm looking forward to for this Egg Bowl this year is the fact that you have two offensive masterminds going at it. It's gonna be like a Big 12 game in the SEC West, which you don't really see as much. I think that's going to be interesting.
Oh, it could for sure. It could definitely be a higher scoring. I feel like right now with Matt Corral and John Rice Plumlee and Ole Miss to choose from for Kiffin, he's in a bit of a better spot than Leach is at Mississippi State. But Leach has proven his ability to develop talent at the quarterback position, and you never know with injuries, right? You never know. It's so hard to predict it. There's so many other games that you have to play before you get to that point. And then it's a rivalry game, so once you even get to that point, you have to pretty much throw everything out the window. But I think this is definitely going to make Mississippi State and Ole Miss, I feel like, more attractive in eyes of recruits. And I think at the end of the day, the number one target you have if you're a football program is bringing in the recruits. Now, I can't speak to Mississippi State's facilities. Ole Miss's facilities are decent. I mean, obviously the Mannings have put a lot of cash into that school, but our Oxford and Starkville aren't exactly the biggest spots on the map.
Neither is Tuscaloosa, though.
Neither is Clemson.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know.
And neither is Clemson.
I do think one point that is particularly important to note is that I think it is important, especially when a coach is just getting started off. I know Leach is going to have his guy in Costello, but I almost prefer to see two guys that are going to be dueling it out for a starting spot, because then you can develop both guys and you're not just stuck with an all or nothing. Like, for instance, if Costello was over at Ole Miss and Kiffin had all his eggs in one basket on one guy, you've at least got two guys you can work with and develop, and you'll at least improve as the season goes on as one guy starts to improve more than the other would. So I think both are in good spots given where they've been in the past and where they are now.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, look, guys, this was a lot of fun.
How about next week we compare Arkansas and Vanderbilt?
We'll see how well.
Trash and garbage.
Oh my goodness! Are we just going to continue to pick bottom feeders? Actually, one of the topics that I really wanted to get into here in the next coming weeks is UNC.
It's happening
because I know it might make you break out in cold sweats, Bradley, but I think everything that's going on at UNC right now, they're trending up. Mac Brown is a better coach than I think myself and a lot of other people gave him credit for in his older age. So I don't know. It might be interesting to kind of unpack some sleeper teams within the ACC because, hey, no one's talking about the ACC.
I'm looking at their schedule now. First glance, I'm going 7-5, maybe.
You're so
8-4.
biased, Bradley.
But
there's so much bias,
man. And there's no bias.
You look at Duke. You look at Duke's schedule, and you'd say they're going to go 12-0.
I've seen it before.
But seriously, though, but seriously, I think UNC and Duke are in better positions. That's an interesting
question.
Now
who would you give a better chance to in terms of record this year? Duke and UNC or Ole Miss and Mississippi State?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Now remember, UNC
I think
goes
the ACC
and plays
is a
Auburn
lot softer. So but I mean, ACC is so soft right now, man. It is so soft. It's like a pillow. I mean, it's just a big squishy pillow. Like there's nothing. There's
Dude,
no, it's a
Evan's
wet
gonna
paper
hate us
bag.
not telling
Evan
him
McDowell from an old AFR episodes. Like it's nothing right now. So I would have to go with your Dukies and the Tar Heels. But
Agreed.
yeah, man, this
No,
was
I don't have
fun.
any
We're gonna
final
have to
thoughts. I
definitely
just
do
wanted to
this
say thanks for
again.
having
Jack,
me
you got
on.
any
I
final
appreciate
thoughts?
it.
Absolutely. Yeah, we enjoyed it. Thanks so much, guys, for calling in, spending your Friday night with us. We'll try and do this again pretty soon next week. We'll keep you posted. You never know.
Stay
We got to take
quarantined,
things a day
everybody.
at a time with all the
Yep, that's right.
coronavirus stuff going around out there. But absolutely, stay home, wash your hands. But yeah, we'll see you next week. Thanks for tuning in. This has
See
been
you guys.
After Further Review
See
for
ya.
Bradley, Jack, and myself. Appreciate you listening.